Welcome to The Forest Garden, a podcast for gardeners who want to upgrade their landscapes into biodiverse food forest systems. On today's episode of The Forest Garden, we'll be interviewing Reggy of Fridgeport, a community fridge project based in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I had the opportunity to meet Reggy at Connecticut NOFA's annual winter conference back in March. After his presentation, I was pretty blown away and thought that our listeners could really benefit from a similar presentation of his thoughts and ideas. Join us today as we learn about how Fridgeport got started, how a community fridge addresses food insecurity issues in urban areas, and much more. Stick with us. Hey everyone. Before we jump into the episode, I thought we could provide a little bit of context for folks who may not be super familiar with concepts like food deserts, food insecurity, and food access issues. So, in 2021, during the COVID-19 pandemic, about 33.8 million people lived in food insecure households in America, according to the CDC and USDA. Food insecurity, for those who may not be familiar with the term, is defined as a lack of reliable access to a sufficient quantity of affordable and nutritious food. The pandemic really exacerbated issues surrounding food access, which led many communities to come up with creative so-called bottom-up or bottoms-up approaches to attempt to provide food insecure people with healthy, nutrient-dense meals. One of those approaches was, of course, what we talk about so frequently on this podcast, community orchard projects and food forests in urban areas, and like the urban forest at Brown's Mill in Atlanta, which was actually proposed in 2016, responding to food insecurity issues in the area before the pandemic brought food security into the proverbial limelight. Another approach, which we'll be highlighting today, is the community fridge concept, which I first learned about in the summer of 2020 from a friend who lived in Philly during the pandemic. Sometimes called a free fridge or even a fridge, the community fridge idea is essentially a public fridge on a street corner that community members can fill with their leftovers or intentionally purchased food to donate to their neighborhood. It doesn't need to be on a street corner, it could be at a Boys and Girls Club or a church or an institution as well. These projects also help to mitigate food waste, which is another huge issue in America. If you're asking yourself why we're covering this topic on a podcast about forest gardens and regenerative agricultural practices, when it comes to food forests, especially intentionally public ones, it's really important to understand who these spaces could be serving and how they could best serve people. And perhaps there's an opportunity to combine these two concepts of community fridges and community food forests or orchards into a public space that really brings people together, gets them excited about plants and cultivation, and feeds the community at the same time. So, without any further introduction, today, we'll hear from Reggy of Fridgeport, the Community Fridge Project in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Let's dive in. Reggy, thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't we start off with your personal background and what brought you to the Community Fridge Project in Bridgeport?
Yeah, Reggy, he, him. I live in Bridgeport, and my personal background is effectively, I was just a laissez-faire organizer for most of my life, just kicking it. And then some Black Lives Matter stuff started hitting. I'm Haitian American, just to give some context for people who are listening. First generation, my mom came to Haiti to have me. It wasn't until about 2018, 2019 when I started to do some food tents, at protests and stuff like that, that I noticed that when we did long-term protests, there was more homeless people taking the food than the people around here. The people who took the food were homeless people and people who lived in the city. There's a lot of people who didn't live in the city that have protests that help out, but they were more affluent, it seemed like. But the people who actually lived in the city or were fighting for their own rights had very little access to food, as in the food. Some people would come by just to some people would come to protest just to have the food tent. I started to notice that trend. And then when George Floyd happened, I was part of also some police encampment work. I noticed that the days we were there, again, it was mostly people around the area who were taking advantage of the food and the homeless people. And putting one and one together, I started looking at maps, food desert information, and things like that to be like, hey, there's a big issue in Bridgeport and we need to have something be done. Try to do it the slow way, which is I talked to a bunch of nonprofits, yeah, you could do this. But with nonprofits, what comes is how nonprofits work is if I see a fire and I'm I need water, take it out. You can't just get water. The nonprofit system is first you have to tell me how big the fire is, how much water you need, what kind of bucket you need. Are there four of the other buckets that could fill it? And that water, what kind of water are you using? Is it tap? And if so, why is tap better than Exmo? Is it better than Poland Spring, etc.? That is to say that everything's overly convoluted. Got real tired of that, so we were like, why don't we just put a fridge here? And that's what we did. Talked to a bunch of churches because churches already have connections to community. During COVID, they were sometimes the only place you could get a food, only place you could sleep, only place you could get Narcan, only place you could wash yourself. During COVID, that was a big thing. So we partnered up with churches to pretty much just amplify their voice and their action. We put some fridges outside, literally, and built community around them. The fridge is one part, the community is what helps it. Without the community, it's just an art piece. So a lot of the work was up front with connecting community to get this fridge to become a resource in the community. Where it's located, the Hollow in Bridgeport, Connecticut, is one of the most densely populated areas of Bridgeport/Connecticut. Bridgeport's the biggest city in Connecticut, for those who don't know. In Connecticut is one of the richest. Fairfield County, where Bridgeport is located, is one of the richest counties in America, and it's the literal number one for insecurity, or inequality, as in the top 10% make, I think, 8.9 times more than the bottom 10%, and that's been like that for the last 20 or so years. The last 20 or so years, this area has been the literal number one in the nation for inequality. Wrapping it up, everything I ran to before brought me to the fridge. The inequality, the seeing that, like, the amount of people who are using the food, what kind of people use the food, as in, like, it was people in the area that were using the food, and they look more like me, black and brown, than anything else. Using all that, we're like, how can we help people in an immediate way, direct action? Nothing more direct than just putting a fridge outside. That's how it happened.
No, that's all really interesting. And thank you for giving some context about Bridgeport and the adjacencies of the 203 and the wealth gap. So a lot of the people who listen to this podcast may never have heard of a food desert before, or the term food apartheid. Could we define that for folks, or just kind of give a little bit more of a deep dive into exactly, what these concepts mean?
Yeah. The simplest definition for a food desert is just a place where people have limited access to healthy, nutritious, affordable food. The measure is half a mile. So people in an area in a half-mile radius don't have access to the healthy, nutritious, affordable food. That's the simplest definition for a food desert or food apartheid area. We use the term food apartheid area as opposed to desert because it was designed like this. Deserts are natural. This is not natural. It was, redlining, systematic issues made this happen. So that's why I use food apartheid, the term food apartheid area as opposed to desert, but they're interchangeable. Like, same meaning. Food apartheid is more just intentional when you're talking about it. So that's it. In Bridgeport, it's easier to get black and mild than it is to get a tomato. Like right now, I'm on a street where I'm looking at a few corner stores, and I know the closest thing is in Fairfield, which is one of the more affluent towns in Connecticut. But if you don't have a car, you can't really get to it.
And just to build off of that, I mean, this is something that from our previous conversation you talked about, like even if there is public transportation that brings you to the, local supermarket, and let's say that is within a certain distance, the actual act of using public transportation to carry, enough food to feed a family of five or something like that, or even just, feed yourself and a loved one, it can be a lot. I mean, people are just really used to being able to drive in their own car in suburbia to the grocery store and load up their trunk and drive home. But all of these factors, extrapolate that experience over an entire year or whatever.
Yeah, like an example banging around my head right now is like, let's say you have $20. You're at home. You have $20 for groceries. You have to get to the grocery store. $4 of it is already out because you have to get to the grocery store and from the grocery store. You have $16 to get to the grocery store. Fairfield County is the most inequitable county in America, and not a lot of people have $20 to spare. Everything else being so expensive around us pushes the prices of the urban area up. Not everyone's going to keep up with the pace of stuff, as in, like, no one in Bridgeport can. Trends are showing that a lot of people are moving out of Bridgeport, Connecticut, because they can't afford it. So they're being forced to move out to places that are 10, 15 minutes away from here just because they can't afford rent. That $4 issue became an $8 issue. That's the problem we have right now. That's like the real problem.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It makes a lot of sense. So why don't we pull it back a little bit and we'll talk like to the actual like first week or first few months of getting things going with Fridgeport, with getting the fridge put in place. For folks who want to maybe do this in their own neighborhood in an urban area where there's a lack of food access, like if you let's say you were going to make like a starter guide, can we just kind of roll it back to how things actually went down in terms of interacting with the churches, that sort of thing?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's pretty much like, what do you want the fridge to do? Like on a literal sense, you could just have it feed people, but my mentality was like 25% of Bridgeport is food insecure. There's 140,000 people in Bridgeport. You do the math. On a good week, we feed about 1,000, 1,500 people, but that doesn't keep up with the food insecurity numbers I just gave you. Let's say that's 40,000 people. So it is more a billboard than a bandage. First of all, you have to figure out what do you want to do. Is it do you literally want to make a fridge to feed the 150 or so people on your block, or is it to bring the conversation about food insecurity? Once you get that, it kind of gives you your path. You got to get used to hearing a lot of no's. The idea is kind of radical. You got to be like, hey, can I put a fridge outside? That's not a very normal thing outside of the New Yorks, the Californias. In areas like ours, which are progressive but not that progressive, it's still kind of a wild idea. So you have to first find a place that would take you. I heard about 30 no's before I heard what yes. And then once you figure a yes out, it's very important to find electricity. Because getting a fridge is outside is not the hardest thing, but finding electricity is, and that's very expensive. Like that cost during the build, that was like a quarter to a half. I have three fridges, so the quarter to a half for cost was figuring out that thing. Because sometimes you have to break cement, sometimes you go through grass, sometimes you might have to drill through a wall to put a cord through. So step one, find a spot. Step two, find electricity in the spot, which is expensive. And step three is, again, there's multiple routes. I do work through mutual aid, which is effectively working with the community. It's not a non-profit. We're not a non-profit. We're not a 501c3. We're 100% donation based. So that comes with the limitations. And like, I don't have money to go at groceries. Everything we got is 100% donation based. So I go door to door. Half the conversations about food waste. Food waste is also a big problem in America. Somewhere in the millions of pounds are wasted and go to landfills every day. So half the conversation is, don't throw out the tomato you're going to use. Put it in the fridge. Building the fridge, it's effectively a shed. How we did it is we took as long as possible because again, people don't have money to help. Sometimes people want to donate and don't have money to. So we took this. A shed takes 4 hours to build realistically, 4 to 6 hours. We took 3 weekends because we wanted people to be like, hey, if you want to help, we'll A, teach you the skills to like hammer some stuff together. B, just put your sweat in because you want to help, but you don't have the access to it through financial means. And C, just be like, hey, you might want to be part of this whole thing. It builds community, just getting people starting the base level. It's foundational. Our foundational work was getting people committed to the mission. That's one way. The other way is just go to Home Depot and buy a shed. When you have an idea behind a community fridge, it's how you want to do it. Some people just put a fridge outside and put a little canopy over, put an umbrella over, and call it a day. It's kind of like, how do you paint a picture? So it was a lot of community building in regard to like, we ran off a GoFundMe, and that GoFundMe was, it had like a limited. We asked them to not give too much money just so more people could give in. We didn't want one rich guy to come in and swoop in and be like, hey, we did that. That's not really community. That's just like, another rich person saying to hustle money out of problems.
I think what you mentioned in terms of the building the community while you do it is really important in terms of people being invested in it and getting the word out, and in terms of like it being a community effort.
That's 90% of the work.
After that, like initial buy-in of people's, and when I say buy-in, I just mean in terms of people's investment. How many folks who helped with the building of the shed to house the fridge on the property, how many of them stuck around and were, consistently invested in the project?
I'd say all of them right now, like on a daily basis. There's between like it's at a church, so it was doing the church thing before. Us putting a fridge there turned it to a building that was used Sundays and Tuesday nights from choir practice, so kind of like an everyday kind of thing. So nowadays, also we opened up May Day 2021, so we've been around like 2 or so years. So nowadays we have any day of the week we have between 8 and 9 people who just come to like do community service because who would have thought people like hanging around food. So either way, like people just come to converse. So I'd say like 100% of people who help build are there on a daily basis, if not on a weekly basis. I never stop the buy-in portion. That's 100% of my work. Like again, we're not a nonprofit, so money doesn't mean anything to us. In fact, when people tell us money, give us money, I tell them like, use Peapod or donate to another nonprofit because it's all intersectional. But the ask is for you to come see what the problem is and help physically. Tossing money out of problems is like an old world away. COVID killed a lot of things, and it's one of them. So if you want to help, come drop it off, use Peapod, but money, there's diaper banks, there's abortion funds, there's better ways to use money. So a lot of it, again, is steeped in theory, and being so forceful and unwavering in theory kind of forced people to get on board. People aren't used to hearing like, we don't want your money. We want you. We want you. We want your spirit. We want you. If money is a capacity, like if you're a neurodivergent, homie, or disabled and you can't get money, or you're elderly, you can't get money the only way, we'll take it. But we try to force the thing like, don't, you're not going to talk, it's not an issue you're going to toss money at. It's a systematic issue that money is not going to help. Money will help, but it's a systematic issue that you have to attack at the root. And you're buying in and continue buying and getting other people buying is the only issue, is the only way to solve this problem, as in like curbing waste and just helping out people who are hungry. So that's it. To answer your question, sorry, 5 minutes wasted. 100% of people,
Yeah, no,
more 90%. I want to say 190%.
I mean, 90% is a good number, 90, that's really successful. So people come, they drop off the food. How often does that happen in a given day or in a given week? And then how often is it completely emptied by people who need it?
Oh, I'd say we're empty 85% of the time. Like to give some context, we get about 3 to 5 tons of food a week on a daily basis. Literally on one location, we get 3 to 5 tons of food a week. We get about 125, 150 people a day. It's been going up since SNAP, the rules with SNAP going on. So people are getting less money for SNAP. With that, we saw more people using it. How much food do we get a day? Like we have anywhere from like, sometimes we have a BJ's or a TJ Maxx day where just like big companies drop off stuff. So it'll be like 3 or 4 companies dropping off half a ton of food. And other days, it's like Sundays, we have a lot of churches that come over. We have a lot of grandparents. We have like Italian clubs and stuff like that to drop off food. So it's anywhere from like 4 to 5 big loads a day to just like 30 people just dropping off food. Like Easter's, whenever there's holidays, people always have leftovers. So everyone will give us their leftovers and plates. And then another part of Fridgeport is we work with a lot of communities to, I forgot what they're called. They're like those little plastic containers that Chinese food places give you and to-go places give you. People clean them and then give us, and we use that. So we break down big stuff. So if people gave us a platter of spaghetti or a platter of lasagna, we break it down and make like 13 plates out of that, put them to-go plates. To answer your initial question, we have anywhere from 4 to I don't know, 50 plus people a day who just come, depending on what time of year it is, if it's a holiday, et cetera, et cetera. It's empty all the time. So fridge again won't solve it, but it brings the conversation, and that's why we kind of the reason we tell people to come see the problem, just so they understand like the money works, but you're understanding how little it does when it comes to systematic issues. Transportation is a problem. These people, being a single mother who has no access to childcare is a problem. There's a lot of problems that make people hungry. It's not just like not affording food. We are a billboard about food insecurity and not a bandage. The thing is like we have systematic. It's more or less like we have systematic issues, and we need bigger things than nonprofits and people tossing money and just giving you a meal once a week and being like, hey, we solved the issue.
I hear you. I think that it might still be a billboard, but I think it's a really important billboard, Like it's not necessarily solving the issue, but it's raising awareness in a way that a lot of things can't. So it's really important.
Yeah. I also want to uplift, like, on a real level, we do feed 150 people a day. So I'm going to say, like, feeding 150 people a day, like, I think one life matters. If we've had one person a day, I'd be cool with that. So 150, I want to say, like, despite all that theory, that wax and poetic, it's still very important. Even if your fridge just feeds 150 people a day, that's 150 people a day. Even outside of theory, just having a fridge, it doesn't have to do all the theory. I just do that just because that's who I am. But a fridge in a general level helps out on a very real level.
So what sort of food gets donated and what sort of food is sort of like received well in terms of like, you mentioned that there's pre-made meals. How often is it vegetables or things that comes right off the farm or things that are going to get thrown away and turned into compost, that sort of thing? Like, is it often fresh vegetables? Is it often processed foods? What's kind of the ratio there?
I'd say that's also a seasonal question. Like, during garden season, we have Connecticut has like surprisingly around like 5,000 farmers. People don't know that, but Connecticut's like a very farmer state. So we have Fairfield County, forget the numbers, but we have a lot of partners like Hungry Reaper Farm. They always hold us down. Green Village Initiative. We have a lot of help from farmers or just like established farmers, and we also have during COVID, everyone seems to become a farmer. So we have like a lot of the moms of Facebook groups helps us out. We have established farmers, hobby farmers, and people who just do like self-sufficiency stuff who hold us down. Percentage-wise, I'd say that's like kale's not the heaviest thing. So I'd say like maybe 10% during the summertime, 10 to 20% of our food is fresh produce. How it's received is, I'd say mixed. People don't know what they don't know. People never ate a salad before, and I gave them a salad, be like, "What the heck is this?" So like sometimes that's a thing. People like it's not a it's not unheard of for a farmer to drop off some veggies and then people will be like, what is this? How do I use this? Sometimes I've noticed like the more immigrants, like people who are like not from America, they know how to use vegetables more. They take more vegetables than people who are like have Americanized diet of like hamburgers and all that jazz. I say the older people use it more, or the people who are more advanced in age use vegetables more than people who are my age and younger. We do have a lot of support from farmers. If anything, farmers are the number one people who know what the problem is food insecurity and all the intersectional problems around it.
And really, it's like the small farmers too. It's crazy. It's like, especially during COVID when all of the global, backups happened, it was small farmers that were still producing food and still feeding America. Have you noticed that the presence of like fresh foods or farm vegetables, has that changed people's opinions about them? Or do you think that people who weren't raised eating a tomato or fresh salad or whatever are just like, no, I don't want that? Or do you think that overall it's had like an impact in terms of sort of getting people to have their own backyard gardens and that sort of thing?
I think having the accessibility didn't change much, but there's other stuff like there's groups around here like Cook to Grow that teach you how to cook and how to cook with like farm food. So the combination of like us giving them, and then there's also like again what you don't know. So people giving them filling in that gap so they do know. I think the combination of efforts has helped raise awareness about the importance of fresh food. Plus, like culturally speaking, everyone's on a fresh food kick. Like you can't go on Instagram without seeing kale. Like people drinking kale smoothies, Instagram, TikToks, all that healthy lifestyle. So I think the general conversation of the world combined with like more places that are teaching people how to eat healthy. I want to say that specifically because of farmers, but I say they couldn't bring that conversation without them. People don't know what they don't know, but there's a lot of curiosity. They see something, they want to learn more, and now there's places that will teach them. Because I can't teach everyone to cook. I can't personally cook myself. I can hardly cook myself, but I know like the community helps us down. Another reason that a community is important. If you have 100 people and two people who cook, that's a bunch of classes. That's two people could hold $25, 25 people classes. That's four classes you could teach people, et cetera, et cetera. It's how you want to build it.
No, I mean, I feel the same way, especially when it comes to foraging or urban gleaning projects or urban ag projects, or just, even growing some of the more unusual foods and fruits and perennial vegetables and that sort of thing that are talked about a lot in the sort of communities around forest gardening and that sort of thing, what this podcast is all about. It's great to grow it, but then at the end of the day, if you don't know how to like cook it and make something really delicious out of it, it just sits there and like a lot of the times the folks just don't know how to process these foods and to preserve them, or even to make like just a quick something quick and delicious out of them. And so the education element is huge, and it goes beyond the food access issue. It's like all across the board. But that's great that there is a resource in the community in terms of a way that like sort of a partner. And it has the partner that's in the area for you. Have you guys collaborated at all, or is that something that it's mostly they're doing on their own, and there's like some potential for crossover?
We have we've collabed as in like they've come over and helped us out. When it comes to food insecurity, what I've noticed not only Connecticut nationwide, it's a big issue, small room. So there's like in any state there's like 20 or so people working on it. So yeah, there's always a lot of collaboration. We all know each other. We're all working together to fight food insecurity. It's not the sexiest topic, so there's not a lot of you got to be a silent kind of a type of person to work on food insecurity, and it's not not a lot of people find it sexy. So yeah, you collab a lot with the same people who work in food insecurity and food justice work.
And maybe it will be sexy, but even if I mean, in the future, I don't know if it being sexy would be a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind if it's sexy or not, as long as we have some kind of change. Like that's trying to make it sexy just because I understand the world we live in, shorter attention spans, etc., etc. But sexy or not, as long as we get some kind of help, it's cool with me.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, like you said, social media is a big part of that, potentially. I
Yeah,
mean, even, yeah, I don't know. TikTok especially just seems to have this incredible impact on the things, the stand, like you were saying, like the normal planning approach of, okay, this is how much water we're going to pour and it's going to come out of this tap and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just kind of like skipping all of that and circumventing the route.
yeah.
So, in terms of what other allies you could see to fight insecurity. And when I say allies, I don't necessarily mean organizations. I just mean so the community fridge is one intervention. There's other examples, like in Philadelphia, of the free fridge movement, let's call it, I guess. And like you said, it's not a solution. It's a billboard. It's something that's, there to raise awareness and help people out, but it's not going to fix the problem. But what are some other things that you see as ways to fight food insecurity in Bridgeport and in areas with low food access in general? Something that I'm really interested in is orchard projects and like the Philadelphia Orchard Project and different urban agriculture interventions. I'm interested if you think those have some value. And then if there's if there's other things too that I'm not even aware of beyond, like outside of urban ag, other sorts of community partners and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the orchard projects, food forests, like the ones they have in like Detroit and Atlanta help. But honestly, a lot of my work is trying to push myself into inefficiency. Like I don't want. I think I mentioned before. I don't want Fridgeport to exist in 10 years. So a lot of it's like you don't need to come to this fridge to do this. Like if you live in an apartment building, I don't know. Let's say 30% of apartment buildings are food insecure. Or I know, but like colleges, 40% of college students are food insecure. You don't need to drive down to you don't need to leave your campus to come to a fridge to drop off food. You probably could knock on 10 doors on your dorm, and 4 people would be hungry. So the conversation is, I think that helps out the most. Like making all that stuff we do is cool and quirky and all that stuff, but a lot of it, like, there's a lot of food waste. There's enough food in America. Like it's just like housing. There's enough house to fit enough homeless. There's enough food to feed all these people. It's more or less how do we stop wasting food, get it from so my tomato doesn't chill in my fridge for 2 weeks and then become something in the garbage for me. Like, all right, I'm not gonna eat tomato, but I know a neighbor or maybe our apartment building has a pantry or something. So I think that is what the biggest thing is. So like all these products work, but I think like foundationally getting community to be like, hey, let me just help my neighbor. All this quirky stuff is cool, but like what really helps is just going next door. I see someone hungry. I got everything to make a sandwich. Here it is. I'm not gonna just hold on to it and then throw it out a week later. So I think just breaking the barrier down of people just having food and wasting it and just be like, hey, it's not a big thing because it is a big thing. So everything, I think from food deserts, like my day job, I'm trying to do food deserts. I think that's cool. Orchard project, Milwaukee forests, where they build like tiny 10 by 10 to 30 by 30 forests in very hyper located area. I think that's all great things. But I think the biggest thing that would help is just like, if I'm on your block, I should feel comfortable helping out if I see you're hungry. Right now, there's a stigma behind it. It's like, oh, I'm not gonna help them. I'd rather throw food. So I think that's I think that's the biggest thing. Just making community, and helping, getting people to help each other.
Wise words. That all makes sense, and I hear you, especially about the food waste issue. I remember I was in Vermont when they had just came up with like a bill that passed that said, and they did it like 7 years in advance, I think. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure they did it pretty far in advance. That they said like, at restaurants and people's homes and everything, like everybody needed to compost their food waste. And so there was a lot of pushback of people who were just, really used to throwing their chicken bones in the garbage and really, didn't understand the concept or didn't want to get on the compost bandwagon. So the food waste issue is huge. And in terms of, I mean, but what you're talking about is like changing culture. That's just going to be such a hard thing
Yeah,
to do,
effectively.
So like,
Yeah, it's why like that's why a lot of work is like being very clear. Like if you want to help, you got to come over here. A lot of the change in culture is just like saying no to stuff people have become very accustomed to, like just tossing money in a GoFundMe, stuff like that. It's like no, you can't do that. But yeah, changing culture is very hard, very aggravating for every party. Like I find it just as annoying as other people find me annoying. But it's like change ain't easy, change ain't fun, but change has to come.
so let's talk about how you migrated things over to New Haven and to Hartford. How did that happen? What was the timeline? What was did people reach out to you? Was that always the plan to have Fridgeport become something that became more of at a regional scale? Or what, how did things go down?
I mean, when I started for Fridgeport, like Connecticut, like in general, we have 67 food deserts, which is the fourth in the nation. For people who don't know what Connecticut looks like, it's about an hour and a half tall and 2 hours wide. Within those hours I mentioned, there's 67 places where half a mile you can't get healthy, nutritious food. It always was in mind that like this is not just a Bridgeport problem. Something this small has this many food deserts. We gotta expand. Bridgeport's the biggest city in Connecticut. New Haven's like the third biggest city in Connecticut, and Hartford is the capital of Connecticut. And all these are urban centers with high populations of immigrants, BIPOC, marginalized communities. So it's always these three places always came off on my head. They've always were being planned. So what happened was Fridgeport got off. I figured out what the foundational work is, how you do it, like outside of theory, how you build a shed, the electricity, like lights, things like that you have to be considerate of. I like one of the things I take into mind is my mom can't come, then I didn't do a good job. So we have floodlights. Again, like hunger is like a problem that is there's stigma behind it. Some people want to get food at night, so we thought about that, et cetera, et cetera. With all that in mind, the idea was never just do one, just because like again, we're a billboard, not a bandage. And there's if you ever taken a highway, it's not one billboard. It's like you take down a highway, you'll be like you drive 10 miles to see 10 billboards that say go to Foxwoods or go to a casino or buy this, buy that. So it's the same thing. Just putting it there and be like, food insecurity is not just a poor city in Connecticut problem. It's also the capital, the place, the city where Yale's at, where Yale calls home. So the conversation was like, this is a problem everywhere, and we're going to show it to you. So how it happened is, specifically speaking, Fridge got down in Bridgeport 4 or 5 months later, talked to some comrades who wanted to repeat this. Well, there was a little of evolution because our fridge in Bridgeport has one. The one in New Haven has two because one's more traditional in regards to everything goes into it, and the other we have for our homies with dietary restrictions, be our Muslim friends or Jewish friends, people with vegetarian, vegan diet restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a conversation that grew from there, and then we had that in Hartford, and then just repeated that in the capital. The idea was always to have more than one place, because again, food insecurity is not a poor black problem; it's an everywhere problem. It's examined in a systematic way. People stop going to these fridges and just start being like make policy and stuff like that.
Let's talk about the policy side of things for a little bit. In terms of the policy side of things, how does that play a role? How do people who are interested in food access or in community fridges or other ways of addressing a lack of food access, these are all bottom up approaches, and the policy kind of thing where you actually go to your legislation and say, hey, this is a problem. We need to fix food waste, or we need to fix issues of food access in urban areas. That's like a top down kind of thing. So give us some context there in terms of how to do it or what some tools are to accomplish this.
Yeah, we did a policy route because nationwide, the government is real comfortable. Like, yeah, we hear about this problem, but that's what nonprofits are for. But our pushback is like, then why do you exist? That's why we do policy. Just be like, if you're not going to do this work, then what the fudge are you here for? Why are you getting these paychecks, these health insurance plans, these like summers off? So it's like a lot of the policy I've personally pushed is like we do the grassroots thing of a year or two, and then we come to the politicians like, here's the idea, here's what we work with community, we do coalition. You're gonna ride with us or not, and then just do that through 169 towns in Connecticut. But it's effectively like we build the policy, and then we're like, you gotta poop or get off the toilet. So that's what we are. Here's the toilet. What are you gonna do with it? I'd say it's kind of top down in regards to like the government has millions of dollars. We're not a 501c3 and we do it 100% donation based. Like I don't have like in real world, like I got jobs, I got health insurance, I live a life, and I'm just trying to help my community, but I still have like a mom that's older, I got family, et cetera, et cetera. My passion and look for justice shouldn't be like that shouldn't be the only option. The government's there for a reason, the millions of dollars, the federal money you get for a reason. So we push a policy to be like, you shouldn't be comfortable with this, you shouldn't be happy with this. It's a systematic problem, and the policy attacks the system. Like the system is the government, so you can't really attack systematic problems without attacking the system. So that's why we do policy. Took me a while to get to that answer, but hey, I knew I was going to get there.
No, that's great. And honestly, like before, when you're talking about like designing the fridge for and having floodlights so that your mom can feel safe, I feel like that's a consideration that's so important. Like a lot of the times as men who make things in public areas, we don't always think about safety in the same way that our moms might.
Like the mentality is like you should be thinking about your neurodivergent comrades, your elderly comrades, your healthy comrades. The term comrade is like we're all in this jail together. We might not be friends, but we're trying to get out. Like that's the mentality behind it. So I think my mom should be there. Elderly people, like we've done the fridge. Physically, our fridge it used to have grass, but then we put like wood in front of it. We made like a walkway just because people who had wheelchairs and people who said like it messed with their knees, et cetera, et cetera. So that's very important too. Every consideration. It's kind of hard because every leaf is different and you can't always can do it. But we try to put our hardest to work for make it as accessible as possible to all our comrades.
And when it comes to the policy side of things too, it's like, it's a group effort, I imagine. Are there other organizations in Connecticut that are doing similar work in terms of the policy side of things, in terms of food waste, food access? Who are your allies there?
The Food Shed Network, FEED, which is a Food and Economic Advancement Desk, the Council of Greater Churches, sustainable groups of towns. I'm not sure if the sustainable groups is a thing outside of Connecticut, but they're just like a coalition of people, be it restaurant owners, individuals, people who just have time on their hands, who work together to make their towns more sustainable. For example, there's Sustainable Bridgeport, Sustainable Westport, Sustainable, et cetera, et cetera. Those groups are partners because food insecurity is, again, a problem about waste as much as it is just like people not having access. It's hard to list. We have a coalition about like, I say like 120 people, so I couldn't list them all off. But I say everything down from like a local mom and pop shop and churches to, again, like the food rescues and food shed networks and bigger, more national things.
Gotcha. Looking to the future, if there was any sort of next steps in terms of building community around this idea of food access, are there other interventions that you're thinking about or other things to build off of it feels like you got the ball rolling with the community fridge and it's migrating to New Haven and Hartford and it's established and people love it. Is there a next thing that kind of continues to build community, or is it just this is it and this is working really well?
Right now, we're working on policy to like get a new office in the government to look at food insecurity. In Connecticut, if you have 13 questions about food insecurity, let's say like if I have a question about SNAP or if my kid has universal meals, et cetera, et cetera. If you have 13 questions, you have to talk to 13 different places: the Department of Social Services, Department of Agriculture. So right now, we're trying to make centralized place, as in like you can't build a steady house to a good foundation. So we're trying to put the cement down in regards to building community in the I don't want to say it like this, but building a community in the government so they're working together and it's not just a bunch of silos. We're trying to build bridges in the government so the silos are not working against each other because funding is a big thing. Just as people are competitive in nonprofits for funding, so are governments, so they don't really work together. We're trying to force them to work together, find a solution, stop being redundant because four different offices will have the same report, each doing the same thing every year and not work together. They have different criteria, different schematics, so none of them match. You can't look at one another and try to compare them, et cetera, et cetera. And we're trying to force that. We work with a lot of people because, again, like I have a lot of charisma, but I'm not the smartest guy, so I try to bounce off a lot of ideas with a lot of people. Yeah, we work with the CT we work with the CLCs, the land conservation people. We work with whoever wants to join the conversation and help us push. We take everything into consideration, try to build with them, and try to see what the future looks like.
One thing you mentioned, the CLTs, for our listeners, community land trusts. What sort of work,
Yeah.
or how is there anything that you can talk about there in terms of what that might?
Oh yeah, I talked to land trusts all over Connecticut, and like they're trying to do everything from like, let's say for example, like there's a multi-family house on 2 acres, and there's a bunch of urban farmers. There's I think it's Salem Land Trust who did it out of Salem, Connecticut. Like they're currently working on housing and food insecurity, as in like they're buying land. They're not only buying the land for farmers, but they're buying the housing for farmers, which is a big issue, especially in Connecticut. Like someone will have the cheap part of Connecticut's upstate Connecticut, so someone will live about an hour away from where the farm is. Land trusts are trying to take that away from being an issue. They're trying to do rent to own, which is still theoretical. Like rent to own, so they buy the land, buy the multifamily house on the land, and then try to rent it out to farmers. And that's a conversation that's going on. I don't know anything in practice, but I know like a year ago this conversation didn't exist. So I know land trusts are trying to work out how to fight food insecurity through the lens of places of purchasing and protecting land.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting sort of potential solution, or not even a solution, but something to think about in terms of land ownership in the future and the way to mitigate, the housing crisis and food access and insecurity. Okay, so I feel like we've given listeners a pretty good rundown in terms of food access issues and the Fridgeport Community Fridge Project. Where can people find you? And if you want to shout out any other organizations to check out, now's the time.
They find me on Fridgeport, Fridgeport. Everything but TikTok. I'm old man. So Instagram, Facebook, my Gmail. I think we might even have a website. depending on when they listen to this, hopefully like my goal of becoming inefficient works out so they can't reach me. But like if they want to reach me in 2023, Bridgeport on everything. I like to say if you have money and don't live in Bridgeport, use it on be it a diaper fund or a transportation group or all these problems are intersectional. If my kitchen's on fire, my house is on fire. That's the view of it. So like help out. It will help out someone. But yeah, if you want to help us out, use Peapod. The address is 219 James Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Drop something off. That doesn't work. Help out your diaper fund, your abortion fund, your transportation fund, your homeless fund, whatever. Intersectional. It'll help us out at the end of the day.
That's all great, Reggie. Thank you so much. For those listeners who stuck around the whole time, see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us.